like we talked about the federal election law, because of our friends McCain and Feingold, it's very difficult to navigate those waters. So we have brought on Todd Singer, who, as Mark mentioned, is one of the best federal election law guys in the nation, in the entire Libertarian Party, I should say. I don't want to discredit you, but you might be in the nation here. So, anyways, here's Todd Singer to talk about federal election law.
What I usually do, we start off with a training session in general is you guys have all heard the saying, you know, anything worth doing is worth doing well. I think that's a terrible saying. Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly until you learn to do it well. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't start anything, right? Because you can't do it right off the bat. Well, now I'm going to give you an exception to that rule. Federal Election Commission reporting. You don't want to do it poorly because, as Mark alluded to, there are heavy fines. The county and local races, it's usually not as big a deal as far as the scope, but the feds will hit hard, and they don't even think that they're, you know, like Mark said, $10,000 to $30,000. They just think that's a slap on the wrist, because the kind of money that they deal with is a lot larger than libertarian campaigns are used to raising. In general, and when, of course, federal election, we're talking U.S. Congress, U.S. Senate. If you guys are in a position to run for president or vice president, that would apply. But the trigger is $5,000. If you raise or spend more than that amount, you must file. On a federal campaign, you must file with the FEC. Now, in reality, I'm not a lawyer, you know, I'm just an accountant, but the way that I read the law, even if you don't reach that threshold, the FEC can force you to produce the records that you would need to file anyway. So it's a good idea if you're going to run for that to just have the mindset, okay, I've got to follow these rules. I have to keep a copy of all the checks. I can't take more than $50 in cash from any one person, because that's $50 is the maximum for a person. Anything more than that has to be a check, can't be cash. Things like that, they're in the candidate guide, and I would encourage you to get that on the FEC.gov, the website. They've got the good candidate guides out there. Spend some time with them. You know, I'm a slow reader, but an hour or two can get you through the most important things. And did we mention to not coordinate state and federal campaigns?
I'm not sure
if we mentioned that, but if you got a federal candidate and you got a state or local candidate, do not coordinate between the two, because it's a jumble. It's not going to be worth trying to figure out. Anyone who contributes $200 or more has to be identified along with their address, their employer, and their occupation. And that's the calendar year. So they give you $100, they write you a $100 check in June, then they write you another $100 check in July. You didn't have to report it in June, but now you got to report it in July. You got to report the $100 and the $200 year to date. The other tricky part of the law is what's referred to as federal election activity. And that can come into play with registration. Get out the vote efforts in particular will qualify for federal election activity. If it happens within a certain amount, it's usually 60 days, but it can be any time leading up to a federal. So if you do registration, like Mark said, you wanted to get some legal advice. And with federal election activity, there isn't actually a threshold. If you do any federal election activity, even if you spend the $500, you've got to file with the FEC. We talked about the fines, that they're heavy. And then my general rule is to file paperwork on time. I know that sounds kind of silly, but like Mark said, they've got rules, and if you stay within the rules, you've got a good chance of being okay. If you go out of the rules, their mindset usually is that they have to enforce the rules as written. So if it's a couple minutes late, doesn't matter. If it's a couple minutes late, or if it's a day late, they will consider that a late filing, or it's called non-filing in FEC parlance. So get your filings in on time. With the federal, it's usually at 11:59 p.m. That's usually the deadline. And if you file in paper, you actually can wait up until the day of and then do an overnight. As long as you overnight it on that day, you're still protected. They still consider that to be on time. I mentioned the good resources out at fec.gov, and I think I'm going to cut off at that point because I don't know how many federal campaigns we've got. I know we've got one person at least, but.
Does anybody have questions for Mark or for Todd?
I have one for either of you. Could you guys explain in-kind donations and how those
Sure.
need to be dealt with?
In-kind donation is similar. It would be an example. A friend of yours pays for a conference room or a room at a restaurant. So they pay the restaurant $300, and then you have your campaign event there. Even though you didn't collect the money, that's called an in-kind contribution. Somebody contributed to your campaign in kind of an indirect way. So what you do is you report the income and the expense. You report $300 of income and $300 of expense as in kind, and then you get that person's name, address, employer, occupation, etc.
In what instances do they come after the candidate themselves as opposed to the treasurer or the manager?
It's just, that's how the law is written, and the treasurer is usually on the hook for the most liability, at least from the federal level.
Same for the state. It's the treasurer is the one who, everything's pointed at the treasurer.
The thought process, I think, behind that is, like Sam mentioned, the candidate's supposed to be talking to voters and asking for money, so it's expected that the treasurer is the one that's going to navigate the campaign finance laws.
It's also financial checks and balance.
And we'll see, I think we have Ron.
Yeah, I know it's kind of a ridiculous question, but we're talking about dealing with the government. So what if someone doesn't have an occupation, retired, housewife? Are those acceptable things to put in that
Yes.
spot?
Yeah, so you need to put something down, and it needs to make some sense.
Whatever.
Russian spy.
So just,
Yeah.
they have to have something in the
You put
spot.
something, yeah.
So
you
nothing
can
is
find
not,
something.
is not acceptable?
Nothing's not, that's correct.
Okay.
Mhm.
No foreign nationals, that Tim will get to.
Now, I know you guys didn't say it, but I got the impression that you can't have federal and state races coordinate.
Yes.
What about, as far as county parties, I know in the past we put out like a list of all our candidates in a given year. Do we need to be careful about listing all of the candidates together in one sheet?
Well, you always have to be careful, but no, if it's just a county race or just a local race, you're not going to usually run into anything. However, it's always good to keep in mind that, like for 2010, that is a federal election.
Because we did that last year. We listed Bob Barr and Wayne Allen and
If you mention a federal candidate, all bets are off. Now you entered into the.
Okay, just hand it down to pass it around. And I'm not talking about a candidate doing that. I'm wondering about the county
full
party.
slate.
Because how many of us are involved with the county party here? I mean,
Yeah, slate. I'll have to get to I think there actually is a specific issue with slate.
Yeah. One of the things I noticed last year was that our friends the Democrats here in Marion County had put out something like that with the slate of
Slate
all the
cards.
county, all the people in the county that were running, which included the state reps and state senators.
Did include the federal candidates, there was
Yes,
a question.
it did.
It did. Andre was on there.
Yes, oftentimes though, you'll look at that, you'll see that it was issued by the Republican State Party or the Marion County Party that has an FEC arm of a Republican Party. You can, I know this is being videotaped, so from the standpoint of, is there some issues on can you just put a little bit in there? I haven't seen that prosecuted. I have seen it argued that it's okay if it's very minor. I've also seen other people in election law blogs argue that it doesn't matter.
Okay.
So is there some gray in there? Yes. I'd be glad to talk to you more later about this if you'd like.
In general, I would not mention federal candidates. Also, one other thing I want to mention, these blue cards that were passed out, if you see, it's the second line. Contributions are subject to the limits and prohibitions of the Federal Election Campaign Act. Anything in a federal candidate that you send out asking for money has got to have that on it. There's also some other wording that you could do alternatively, but that's the one that I chose. So you can take the blue, another good reason to take these blue cards with you.